I'm Dorothy, and I did have a dog named Toto. Brave brothers and sisters out there, thank you all for sharing this with us. So here's my story, or part of my story. Just one of my stories. I love to play Bach on the piano. Although only some of his easier pieces, I'm not that proficient. I took lessons as a child and played quite a bit of piano. As a young kid, I also had plenty of friends. Softball, hide and seek, marbles. This was pre-digital age, you guys. I always got high marks at school and I loved life. My mother used to say I was a happy child. And I think I was. It doesn't make a pretty good start in life, doesn't it? However, in high school, I started to see some signs of deterioration in my social skills and accomplishments. I still looked pretty good on paper, so I persisted and hung in there. But then came the interlude. That's what I like to call it. I was about 18 years old, halfway through my first year at the University of Chicago. I was feeling pretty miserable about myself, and it got worse by the week. Then came that day. That day. I hit the wall of my complete nothingness. I was a failure at school, a failure socially, and a failure I was sure in the world's eyes. I was convinced I was not a good person. I was worthless, empty. I would describe myself as feeling like the crumbles from the bottom of a bag of cookies after all the whole cookies were gone. I was nothing but old crumbs. I was not whole in any sense of the word. So, I made a decision. I made a decision to stop everything that hurt. I took some pills. A lot of pills. I took so many I almost died. I woke up in a hospital room with a needle in my left arm. I was still pretty hazy from the pills and seeing lots of strange things moving around the walls and on my bed. It had been too late to pump my stomach, so they were trying to flood my system with whatever they could find to neutralize the poison I had taken. In addition to the dark purple spots I saw moving around the walls, I saw maggots crawling around in an open wound on my hand. That was how rotten I saw myself at that moment. Later, I remember waking to a gaggle of doctors in a starched white coat standing at the end of my bed. I was still a little groggy, but I remembered them all smiling and asking me, "We were wondering if you'd like to stay at the hospital in a special ward for just a while until you're feeling a little better." I was groggy, but I knew enough to jump at the chance. I knew even then I was in very deep trouble and couldn't find my way out, not by myself. I said yes, and they smiled. I had given the correct answer. I was put on Ward 3, W3 as they affectionately called it, the psych ward of an otherwise medical hospital that was part of the university. There were only about 20 of us, male and female, all ages. An interesting and lovable group of souls. We were all just wounded individuals who had lost our way and had given up any hope of finding answers. We represented a variety of maladies, mine being clinical depression, but we ran the gamut. I had a psychiatrist who I saw almost every day, group therapy, and most of all, I made friends with the other patients. Most notable was Vera. She will live forever in my memory. Now remember, this was many, many years back. Vera and I both smoked, and inside the hospital, for God's sake. That's how long ago this was. And both of us liked to chat. We simply got along famously. Vera wore her hair in a bun, but she had some kind of problem with her shoulders and couldn't lift her arms. pin her hair up if it started to fall down. One day after I'd been on W3 for a few weeks, Vera and I were chatting in the lounge and smoking, of course. Her hair was starting to fall down from her neat little bun, and I mentioned it to her. I knew she couldn't raise her arms to do it herself, so I offered to pin it up. She sort of waved me off and said I shouldn't bother. But I persisted, determined I was going to help her. Finally, she said, "Dorothy, your hair is not like my hair." Vera was African American. She said, "I'll have Camilla do it." Camilla was an African American nurse on the ward. I was startled a bit and then laughed and said something like, "Oh, for God's sake, Vera, that's just cuckoo, I can fix it. That's not a problem." And I reached over and pinned up her hair. Vera looked at me for a second, and then she smiled and said, "Dorothy, you're so funny." "Oh, Dorothy, you're so funny." That's what she had said. I think I heard something there. "Dorothy," she was saying, "we're different in some ways, but it doesn't matter to you. How wonderful is that?" Vera had caught me off guard. I looked back at her and realized there was possibly a truth there. She might have spoken. Had I just been a good person? I wasn't trying to be. I was just being my old regular stupid self. But could it be that I was in fact and in truth actually a good person who did things, good things? Not a horrible, worthless person, but actually someone with a good heart. That was the beginning of my conscious healing. Everything else I've been learning on W3 started to fall into place and make sense. I left the hospital a couple of weeks later. Wasn't done, of course. I'll never be done. And I've had a lot of help from therapy and Prozac, the wonder drug for depression. But even with that, I'm still working on the whole thing of who I am, what I am, and how I fit into this world. But that day, I know. I stepped back from the looking glass and saw who I was for the first time. And I'll never forget Vera. So keep the faith in yourself. Seek out support and don't give up. Things will fall in place. And one more thing, some parting words I just heard recently, and I wish I had heard them when I was much, much younger. You may have heard these. You are allowed to be both a masterpiece and a work in progress simultaneously. Woo!